and we had a different and more aggressive approach, I've got to say, in fairness to the ALP, quite incredibly.
Well, look, I'm very mindful of the fact that you do all represent electorates that in the past have been more likely to vote Conservative than not. I know in Kennedy, Bob Catter, it has had a Labor member in the past, but broadly speaking, I think what I've said...
That's not true. That's not true. No, that's not true of Kennedy. Except for my family, it's always been Labor.
Well, it's a Conservative part of Australia. But
no.
You're going to disagree with that too. Okay, all right. But how will the nature of your own electorates influence the decision on which party to support in government, and how do you balance the interests of your individual electorates with how you perceive the national interest? Rob Oakeshott first.
Yeah, look, I think everyone who's been elected today has a very simple job description. This isn't rocket science, the job of being a local member. We wear two hats. One is to represent strongly and advocate and lobby for issues in a local electorate, and then through the Parliament, as a collective of 150 people, to work on national interest issues as a group through the Parliament. So I'm confident I'm going to do that. I continue to do that. I'm confident Tony and Bob are doing that. What is in question today, which has been a bit of a concern from some of the media reports, is people who are choosing to put their political parties before that national interest. Some of the comments that I've heard in relation to weighing up particular numbers, whether it's preferences, whether it's numbers of seats. You can spin this one any way you wanted to get a political outcome for your party either way. My strong message to all involved is to don't try and be Monday experts on this. Don't try and sell a political party message on this. There is a national issue at stake here, and it is stable government. No one wants to go back to the polls, and we need to work together, believe it or not, a concept foreign at times to adversaries in the political process, but this is a together exercise for all of us, and we do need to be sensitive about others' interests and work through a negotiation process and a tricky set of numbers with clean hands and good faith. And if we can do it well, we will impress Australia, I hope. And if we can't do it, my view is we go straight back to the ballot box as quickly as possible.
But just on that question of stability of government, I just wonder how you will judge the workability of either major party to form that kind of stable government, and at what point you'd consider pulling the plug to force another election. I mean, would you take into account which of them is more likely to be able to have a good working relationship with the Senate, the current one and then the new one next year? Tony Windsor.
Well, I think there's a whole range of things we'd have to consider, and that's why we want to sit down and work through these things. Rob's quite right. It is about stability and the way in which a parliament could in fact work over the next 3 years. And in my mind, that would involve the relationships between the lower house and the Senate. There may need to be some changes in relation to how people deal with one another between the Senate and the House of Representatives. But stability is the key to this, and I don't have a problem with it at all. It can work, and I think the three of us and the Western Australian National and others, and Andrea Wilkie, etc., and the Green from Melbourne, we can make this work. And I think if the major parties actually move away from this dog against dog attitude that they've had through the election campaign and look to the national interest on this, that we can come up with something that's quite successful. That may take a little time, but it can work.
When you say maybe a different relationship with the Senate, what do you mean?
Well, the way in which the Greens have been treated in the previous Parliament, for instance, very hard to get communications from the Greens back to the Prime Minister, for instance. No, not the current Prime Minister. I don't know whether there's been discussions there. She hasn't been there very long. But there's been some breakdown in communication between the two houses of Parliament because of the political differences that are in those two houses. Now, I think we've got to look a bit past that and try and establish a relationship. The Senate is probably going to be a hung Parliament for a long time now, and I think the House of Representatives has got to start to work with the Senate rather than work as two separate houses and play two separate battles or war games in those two houses. And if we can help in negotiating those sorts of positions and get some decency in that relationship, I think the Parliament will work a lot better.
Okay, we've got just a few minutes left, but I'm going to come to you now, Bob. I just wanted to, I just wanted to ask you, Bob Katter, to move on to the next point. But what do you regard as the deal makers or the deal breakers in terms of policy? What are the fundamental core policy issues that will decide your position, Bob Katter?
I'm much stronger, and I think because my electorate has suffered so dramatically, North Queensland has suffered so terribly as a result of these policies. There's a freedom issue here. You know, we're not allowed to fish much at all. We're not allowed to go camping or shooting or even boiling the billy. We've got a terrible problem with the deadly flying foxes. They're going to kill many more people than taipan snakes do in Australia. But I mean, these are issues that there's just a different paradigm needed. Rural Australia is closing down. 90% of the continent is occupied by not many more people than were here when Captain Cook arrived. And I sent out a great photograph of Jack McEwen, and two quotes here are very relevant. They said, "Did the Country Party tail wag the Liberal dog?" And he said, "Yes." There was no complications about it. And secondly, he said, "This great treasure, which is our country, I fear unless we occupy it and develop its resources, that it will be taken off us." And the great Ted Theodore said exactly the same thing. That's the paradigm that we must be able to sell to the Australian people, and we've been given a God-given opportunity here to be able to do that. We've worked very well together. I've been very, very impressed with Tony Windsor and with Rob Oakeshott. They're people of great integrity and very great intellectual capacity as well. And if people are drawing analogies with the Country Party, I think they're very valid. Those people were characterised by great conviction and great intellectual capacity. Okay,
Rob Oakeshott, key policy issues that will be make or break for you.
Look, I'll continue to lobby and advocate for all the local issues, but at a national level, what is of significance locally in an area such as mine and other areas is the process of the Parliament and the process of public policy. We spend a lot of time focusing on the politics and the policies of the major parties, and it might sound a bit boring, but if we can get this process issue right, and we've got a unique opportunity over the next week or two to get the processes right, get the committees of the Parliament back in play, get reports actually dealt with an outcome from them, such as the Henry Tax Review, such as the Garneau Report. There were a lot of them in the last Parliament, lots of time and effort and money. We all got locked up in that process, you and I together, and I think generally we're underwhelmed at the end by the actual delivery and the outcomes that didn't come from it. So the work's been done at the front end. I would hope in the next Parliament, if we can get that process of turning work from eminent people in Australia into realities in public policy, then we've got a good thing going with this hung Parliament issue.
Okay, Tony Windsor, just key policy issues for you.
Well, health is always the one. We don't have to poll anybody to find that out. Water, broadband and how it relates to the delivery of health and educational and business services long term, absolutely critical in my view in terms of infrastructure for this century. And the water and renewable energy debates, they're debates we really do need to happen, and they're critical to different parts of regional Australia.
What about climate change? I don't want to get into a long debate about this, but very simply, climate change where there is a clear difference between the two major parties. Just very quickly amongst the three of you. Tony Windsor?
Well, I don't think there is. I think Kevin Rudd used climate change as a political differentiation rather than a real policy initiative, and I think that's partly responsible for what's happened now. But climate change, regrettably, is seen as carbon tax or emissions trading. There are a lot of things that can happen in a practical sense in terms of renewable energy and other things that have an impact on what we now call climate change, and we should be doing those things.
Okay, very quickly, Bob Katter. Climate change?
Well, I didn't get my chance to talk on the two issues previously, but let me just say this. You know, when you talk about carbon, Tony is right. All they've operated on is these carbon credits. I mean, all that's going to happen is the big corporations in Sydney are going to sell more securities, that's all. And they're going to go out and plant millions of trees and they'll all die. And that was our experience in North Queensland when they planted all the trees. Direct action is the term being used by Tony Abbott, and God bless him for doing that. But the ALP government, I mean, they moved. They actually moved on a national energy grid. And the North Australia Clean Energy Corridor is all about utilising a tiny little bit of our water, 7% of our water resource and 2% of our land in North Queensland. And I know it sounds incredible. We can support a population of 60 million people. The Murray-Darling supports a population now of 20 million people. We've got that 7% is 3 times more water
okay.
than Murray-Darling, 2% of that land. I mean, ethanol, of course, delivers cheap petrol, clean petrol, overcomes your carbon problem.
Okay.
And also, we don't have to buy it from overseas.
Okay. Now, I did want to ask you about the personalities of the two leaders and whether that's going to matter for you at all, but we're not going to have the time for that. So a very quick response to this one. How good is your bull dust meter? Tony Windsor.
Pretty good. Pretty good. I can smell it a mile away.
Bob Katter.
I haven't smelled any tonight, though.
Bob Katter. Your bull dust meter.
I really think that the characteristics of my independent colleagues, if there was one thing that differentiated them out, is that my bull dust meter registers 0 with both of them, and sometimes they can be a bit harsh and blunt, but they're very, very low on that BS scale.
Rob Oakeshott, your meter?
My meter. I think we're going to be okay through this process, and hopefully there's not too much bull dust from anyone. It's a national interest issue.
Well, good luck with what lies ahead. But Rob Oakeshott, Bob Katter...
Kerry, can I just say...
You've got 10 seconds.
It's stability issue. Right, stability issue. We're not talking about instability, we're talking about democracy. And it's a new concept, and really it's been we have been able to force that onto the national agenda. Other countries have multi-party systems. We've got a sort of type of that happening now in Australia. We're moving out of the 19th century into the whatever we're in the 21st century.
And thanks finally again for that. Tony Windsor, Bob Katter, Rob Oakeshott.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you.
Thanks.